Hello and welcome to MCU and Comics. My name is Peter Levi. Glasses free for this one because there is no script. I'm just talking. And the topic is adaptations. A topic that tends to lead to acrimony, yelling and screaming online, with people drawing very heavy lines upon which no one can cross. And I feel like the arguments are about the wrong things. So I wanted to briefly go over what an adaptation is and what I think is fair grounds for discussion. I've talked about this in a very small way in the blog periodically. I've talked about it a little more broadly with specific IP elsewhere, but this is meant to just sort of be a holistic look from my perspective. So let's open with, well, coffee first. What is an adaptation? Well, in the most broad sense, you are taking something that existed previously and putting it on screen, television or film. I mean, there are other ways to adapt something. You could take something and put it in a play. You could adapt a film and turn it into a book. But I'm specifically talking about television and film. So these come from corporations. These are corporate bought. And they are there to make money. That is the sole reason they exist. Outside of a very thin line of prestige films or shows where the entity believes that prestige is itself profitable, but just in a more indirect way. So we're going to spend a couple million on a couple of reputable actors and directors or whatnot to make something very fancy. It's usually some individual's tragic story, almost always, where you can film in a couple of different sets in somebody's living room and hope that some award show will give you the thumbs up. And then you can talk about how the people involved and yourselves are award winning. Right, but that aside, because I don't think the people who are aware of that material that's adapted for those things are a large enough audience for anyone to care. The next Michael Ondaatje fan who shows up screaming about how his book was adapted wrong is going to be the first. You don't get fandom for things like that typically. Not in the same way anyway. So that aside, generally speaking, it is much more direct profit. I want to make toys. I want to make stickers. I want to make keychains. I want to make a mobile game. Whatever. I want to take this thing, which itself was profitable on some level, even if it's a small level, like Winston Groom's Forrest Gump book. I want to take this thing that was profitable for someone else, and I want to make it massively profitable for myself. It's about enriching yourself. So there's no, in the broadest sense, there is no artistic element to this at all. You are essentially stamping toys out of plastic. That's really where your head should be for what executives are looking for when they purchase this sort of thing. So that's what it is. What is the ethical or moral obligation that the corporate entity has towards the IP it bought? Well, broadly speaking, none. Unless an agreement has been made with the rights owner where they have to follow A, B, and C, and do whatever you want. You want Harry Potter to be about a group of animated crackers who get thrown into soup and are eaten by a penguin. Honestly, there's nothing preventing you from making that outside of the fact that almost no one except me would want to see it. So I don't think you can ever say, hey, corporate entity X can't do this to my favorite book. Yes, they can. They absolutely can. They are under no obligation to make the thing you want or you have imagined at all. The only sort of obligation they have is to shareholders or to fellow executives or their own reputation, such as it is. Although usually if you're an executive, if something fails, it's not your fault, it's the director / writer. Usually director, no one cares about the writers. So you deflect the blame and then make more terrible movies. So that's it. There's no, you should never complain on those grounds. They can do what they want. However, because they want to make money and typically the IP they invest with already made money, so it has a fan base. Usually you want to throw them a bone. In fact, you want to do more than throw them a bone, because they are the ones most likely to buy your crap. You want to bring in that core fan base, because just arbitrarily making anything doesn't tend to work, and we'll get into that. So there is a financial incentive to placate or please pre-existing fans, but it's not an obligation. It's just an incentive. You can ignore incentives. You can indeed do what you want. And that brings us to the old George R. maxim: the books are the books, the show is the show. And again, that's true, but it's there is a but that comes after that, which is it is rare. In fact, I can't think of any examples. One may exist of something that was broadly popular before it became a film or a show that worked by pissing off those people. I don't think it happens. You must, in a way, you are held hostage to a bare minimum of servicing the needs of those original fans. Now, the argument that tends to be made by the corporate entity when it changes something is, yeah, okay, we need to satisfy those people, but we want to bring more people in. And this is understandable. You want more money, so you don't want to just lean on that fan base. You want a bigger fan base. For film, this is so people buy more tickets, plus the swag. For streaming is a little different, where it's mostly just about subscriber base. From what I can tell, Netflix and Amazon have not really gotten into the secondary market of toys and whatnot very much. So theirs will mostly just be about subscriber count. But essentially, it's all just, make it more profitable. And how can we do that? The typical approach, and this goes back a long, long way, possibly all the way to the beginning for film anyway, is make it accessible to everyone. Grandma, little kid, everybody can come and enjoy. So the first thing you usually want to gut is the rating. It needs to be PG. And then one of the more modern shifts of the last 10 years for sure, might go back a little further than that, is representation. Oh, this, we're going to do Jane Austen, but everybody's white. So let's somebody's here from China. It doesn't matter what, right? You invent your reason. And then if someone complains, you can be like, hey, there were 5 people from this part of India living in this remote British area at the time. You know what I mean? Like, there are ways to justify it, or you can just skip the justification and be like, yeah, we know. But the book is the book, the show is the show, so we can do what we want. Right? And how successful that is, I think, is a case-by-case basis about whether it does or doesn't work. And you also have to use the required criteria of success, which is profit. Sometimes we don't know those numbers. Sometimes it's not clear. Because it is in the interest of the corporate entity to tell you things are successful no matter what. Everything was an amazing success until they stop making it. And then they'll tell you, it's not profitable anymore. So you cannot take official jargon as meaning anything at all. You have to look at their actions, right? So that's kind of what you get for how an IP is taken and broadened. And so we get into this weird dance, and we're back to fandom now. So initially we should just say, as a fan, as a viewer, you're welcome to like or dislike something for any bloody reason that you want. If you think Harry Potter should have buttered his toast in a particular way and he didn't, and that means the films are garbage and you hate them, that's perfectly fine. That's absolutely fine. No one can tell you can't feel that way. You can. If that was the straw that broke the camel's back, perfect. As long as you're not telling everyone else that that's why they should hate the film, that's fine. Subjective enjoyment, there's no discussion to be had there. So when someone tells you, I like such and such for such and such a reason, There's really no room to argue that. That's just stating personal preference, right? It's not a point of argument. What you can argue about is more objective things. Was this film or show shot well? Is the acting good? Is the writing good? Is the plot good? Now, there's some room for some subjective interpretation for some of those, but things like plot or the technical elements of film aren't really. They're far less open to what is subjective. It's much more objective. Something makes sense or it doesn't. Something is shot in a visually pleasing or sensible way or it's not. So that's much more cut and dried. And you can say that, and if someone is going to use criteria like that for not liking something, that is also, of course, perfectly valid. And what you can say then is, you might like such and such, but I don't think such and such is a good example of whatever, or is a good adaptation because it failed in these criteria. I do think plot failures and adaptations are the least excusable thing because the story already exists. So unless it has plot problems inherently, you should never have them in your adaptation. Everything should be. This is one of the big problems with the first season of The Witcher is it has all sorts of character and plot problems that are introduced by the writers. And it's why I think that series is destined to go down in smoke, irrespective of anything else they do. If you can't write properly, it's just never going to happen. That's why I don't think we'll see, if we see a second season of WandaVision, and I don't think we will, it's not going to be from Jack Schaefer, or at least not without a lot of assistance. Because again, you had plot issues there that had no business being there. It doesn't matter who's responsible for why they exist. It's just they shouldn't be there, and so the quality control was not up to snuff. But that's an aside. So just going back to it, just arguing with people over things about subjective enjoyment, I think are pointless. But that is what you get. Let's say you're it's the 1980s and you're not happy that Michael Keaton is Batman. That's okay. It is okay for you to not have been happy with that casting. I do think you have to take into account after the fact the quality of the performance and how it fit within the film that you were given or the show. But you can absolutely say, hey, that's not what Batman looks like. I don't think you can ever have to tell someone that they shouldn't feel that way is not only patronizing, but what are you really accomplishing with that? You know, that choice made by the company is purely for financial reasons. They just want it to be profitable. There's nothing creative or artistic going on there, not at all. It's just to make money. So to sit there and be like, you know, you didn't like your McDonald's French fries, how dare you, is pretty silly. So what about my own view? If I'm not familiar with something, I obviously don't care what's been changed because I have no basis with which to have formed an expectation. I'm going to judge it purely on what it is as it is. And if I enjoy something like that and a fan of the original tells me like, oh my God, that sucked, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I'm going to say I liked it, but I didn't know the core basis. Maybe I would have felt the same way. It's difficult to say. What I will say is, you know, when you know an IP and you're a big fan of it, what you want as a fan is to see that represented on screen as closely as possible. And that's not a failing. The corporation is selling you, hey, that thing you like, we're going to do that. And you can see that when that's stuck to, when people try to be faithful, Lord of the Rings is a great example. The early seasons of Game of Thrones, the Harry Potter movies, you know, they all have some changes, but these are small, usually related to pacing or condensing the plot. And not a whole lot else has changed. It is, however successful you think it is, an attempt to take what was in the original and put it on screen as faithfully as possible. And I without exception, and maybe someone can give me one, but I can't think of a popular IP that has been changed significantly that's succeeded. Someone out there might be able to think of one, but I off the top of my head, I can't think of any. Faithful adaptations are always more financially successful. If that's the case, why do we see so much fiddling? Well, in part, it's because executive producers, directors, actors, writers, they all want to put their own personal stamp on something. And if it's very faithful to the original, that credit's going to go to the writer of the novel or play or whatever else. They are not going to get the credit, and they want credit. These are people with big egos. They want to be part of that success. Secondly, there is the broader financial push to like, well, it needs to be for everybody. No, it's not enough just to a field. So essentially what it says is executive producers don't have enough faith in the original to sell to new people that they think they have to change it for them. And I believe this is an erroneous conclusion, except of course for things that were not that successful to begin with, naturally. But if you have something enormously popular, like Lord of the Rings is a good example, or Harry Potter, changing it is pointless. It has already established itself in the pop culture canon. It doesn't require tweaking to draw in the casual audience. So while it's an understandable, I mean, one of the other reasons you want to change things too is to justify your own existence, right? You know, if I'm a casting director and I'm just like opening up the page, this is what I need, go get that. You know, people are going to be like, what are you for? What are you accomplishing? Where is your stamp on this thing? So some of it is just sort of inherent self-interest, you know, trying to protect yourself. But yeah, in general, I don't think larger IP require this sort of massaging. I do think for things that have been done a million times, if you're going to adapt Hamlet or whatever, that's already been done faithfully. So it's understandable to try to take a risk and do something different. It's like, what if they're robots? No one's done robots before. Now, is that going to work? Probably not, but you can understand the inclination. But what's frustrating, I think, for a lot of people is often either something has never been done before, and so people are already changing it before it's ever been tested, or it's been done before but not particularly well, or it's been a long time, and you know they still want to see that faithful adaptation, and instead you're getting, I don't know, claymation toasters running around. It just, there's an understandable frustration, and I think when the tweaking hits a certain point, you alienate the main fan base and you're only left with the casuals, and the casuals might show up once, and then your film or your show fails, and what are you left with? And you can see so many examples of how this happens. I'll give you just a few recent ones. 2016 Ghostbusters. I know people who like that movie. I do. But it failed. Sony's approach of fighting with the fans was a bad one. And none of the people who enjoyed that film, for the most part, bought the swag. And that's a big part of a franchise like that. People need to buy the toys. So what are we getting now? That movie is essentially being thrown away. It's like it never existed, and they're making a sequel to the original two films. And now, will that succeed? I don't know. But because of how it's being done, fans of the original are far more likely to show up. They're far more likely to buy the extras. And that's profitable. So, you know, trying to think of another good example, and I'm so locked in remembering all this screaming over Ghostbusters. It's pretty funny. Actually, the Snyder Cut reminds me of another one. So, Snyder's DC films were divisive, and they were divisive with the core fan base, not just casual fans. Man of Steel, Batman v Superman. You know, these films were divisive, and that caused Warner Brothers to make an abrupt change of course, and that's where we get the complete disaster that is the DCEU. Excuse me. Now, I would argue that what Warner Brothers has done since actually isn't any better. In fact, it's amazing to say, but it's actually worse. However, you know, there you saw someone who was a fan, Snyder, make films that he wanted to make in the way he wanted to make, but they were so noodly, they were so specific, they were such narrow takes on popular characters that the inherent fan base was divided. And then, of course, for casuals, it was too weird and Snyder is someone who's not good for plot. So he's got to win you over with spectacle, and the spectacle just wasn't good enough to win people over. The plot was too confused. I don't know what the Snyder Cut will be like. I haven't seen it. I expect it'll be a improved iteration of Batman v Superman. So fun scenes, but won't make a whole lot of sense. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much. I do think the general point though is made. The more you fuss with something when you're adapting, if it's good to begin with, okay, we're leaving out there that sometimes something gets adapted that's actually not that great, and you can change it a lot, and it can work. But I think specifically, you're going to advertise, you're going to make such and such a thing, you're going to make The Hobbit, whatever it is. The more you fuss with it, the less happy people are with it. And I don't know how long it's going to take EPs to figure out the fact that that's the case. Right now, there's no sign of it at all. We have gone way off into the wild with all sorts of things being done. Marvel had been pretty careful, and other than some casting swaps, they're trying to stay fairly faithful. I don't know if that will continue or not. It's difficult to say, but you know they're not impervious to making this mistake. If you push the boundaries too far on things that are already popular, you are risking the financial reward of using it in the first place. And this is why, incidentally, I don't think you're going to see a lot of radical changes to, say, the X-Men or the Fantastic Four. Particularly the X-Men. That's way too profitable to mess with. Little things like Moon Knight or She-Hulk or Hawkeye or all this little tiny IP, Secret Invasion, nobody cares. These are not IP that have a fan base that matters. You can do absolutely anything you want, and as long as the TV show or film is entertaining, no one cares. That went for the Eternals too. Do whatever you want, but if you're doing something that's big, you're just not going to see those changes. I don't think, because I don't think they'll work. And I'm really curious to see. I assume the J.J. Abrams stuff for DC is going to suck, because that's what J.J. Abrams does best. But I'll be curious to see what is Superman, if we ever see it, how that's received. Although, granted, you do have to take streaming numbers with a giant grain of salt. Parrot Analytics does a pretty good job of trying to figure out views, and Nielsen's gotten better about it too. But it is a default marketing approach for streaming services. This goes for video games too, to tell you, oh my God, what results we have done so well. You have to wait and see before you can actually judge, because financial numbers eventually do become apparent. And eventually you get little articles that tell you the reality out of it. It's like Netflix kept saying the Netflix shows were doing poorly, and then later on found out, well, they actually, wasn't that bad. We just wanted to step away from Marvel stuff. So anyways, that's a lot of rambling. Hopefully it made some sense. Let me just sum up with, if you like an adaptation, if you don't like an adaptation, don't let anyone tell you shouldn't feel that way for whatever reason. That's your subjective enjoyment. I just wish the fighting and screaming about it would stop. If someone doesn't care what's done to an IP at all, good for them. That's fine. But they shouldn't expect anyone else to accept that. There's no reason to. No one is making a mistake there to say, hey, I read this thing, I want to see this thing on screen. That's perfectly valid. Just changing the fact that it's on screen doesn't mean you can't make it faithfully within the limitations of that medium. So I hope we get away from that and people can just stop yelling at each other. It's probably naive to hope for that, but that's my hope, because it does get exhausting. At any rate, next up for me, I'll have to record a video for the Wolverine article I posted 2 days ago, I think. And then I'm going to try to get the News Digest out on Thursday before Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We'll see, hopefully. But that's enough of that. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.